Pegasus killed 17 soldiers in Corinth during the spring of 534 BCE. The official casualty count was lost, but the witness accounts survived, written on clay tablets stored in the Temple of Athena. And those accounts describe something that shouldn't exist according to everything you've been taught. To understand what Pegasus was and why it terrorized the ancient world, you need to understand Corinth. In the 6th century BCE, it was the military heart of the Peloponnese, wealth beyond measure, naval power that rivaled Athens. And for 40 years, the city's military records speak of encounters with a single creature. Always the same description, always the same location, the limestone cliffs above the Acrocorinth. This wasn't myth-making, this was warfare. The creature first appears in written record around 600 BCE. But here's where it gets strange. Hittite texts from Anatolia, written 400 years before the Corinthian accounts, describe an identical winged horse. Same physical dimensions, same behavior, same region of the Mediterranean, which means the ancient historians weren't inventing a myth. They were documenting something that had been terrorizing multiple civilizations for centuries. The coordination is impossible to explain any other way, but the real records, the ones most people never hear about, these come from military correspondence. In 574 BCE, the Corinthian general Philonos sent a dispatch to the ephors in Sparta, describing an attack on a cavalry unit near the Acrocorinth. The dispatch was encoded, hidden in the archive for 2,000 years. The soldiers killed weren't listed as casualties of war. They were listed as consumed by divine wrath. One detail in that report never made it into the official version. The soldiers weren't killed by impact or weapons. The dispatch describes wounds that don't match any known predator of that era, multiple body parts severed cleanly, flesh burned at the edges. And most disturbing, the marks on the bodies were consistent with talons, not claws. No creature in the Mediterranean basin had ever been documented with talons that size. The general wrote one word in the margin, impossible. But it happened again and again, 17 times in 40 years. Between 574 and 540 BCE, a 34-year span, the Corinthian military recorded 17 separate encounters with the same creature. Each encounter followed the same pattern: attacks near dawn, always near the limestone cliffs, always on isolated cavalry units. The military response escalated. By 550 BCE, the Corinthians had organized hunting parties specifically to capture or kill the creature. They failed, every single time. The creature seemed to learn, to anticipate, to avoid traps that had worked before. Here's what changes everything. Pegasus wasn't born from Medusa's severed neck. That version of the myth was created later, around 450 BCE, to explain something the historians couldn't make sense of anymore. The original accounts describe something far older, a creature that existed before the Medusa legend was even written, before it had a name tied to any god or hero. The mythology was invented to bury the truth. The name Pegasus comes from the Greek peg, meaning spring or fountain. The earliest references found in Hesiod's Theogony, written around 700 BCE, describe it as the golden bridled one born of springs. But scholars have always assumed that was poetic metaphor. It wasn't. The creature was tied to water sources. Every single encounter in the Corinthian records happened near limestone springs, groundwater systems, underground aquifers. The pattern was so consistent that Philonos eventually realized the creature wasn't random. It was territorial. It was protecting something. The symbolism makes sense now. Pegasus in Greek mythology is always associated with the Muses, the goddesses of knowledge. It appears at Mount Helicon, where the sacred spring Hippocrene flows. The creature wasn't divine inspiration. It was a territorial predator that nested near water sources and claimed them. The Greeks witnessed this. They documented it. Then they wrapped it in mythology to make sense of something their rational mind couldn't process. By 300 BCE, they had transformed a killer into a symbol of enlightenment. But here's the detail that matters for what's coming next. In every single Corinthian military record, the creature's wingspan is described with the same measurement, 40 meters. The exact same number appears in Hittite texts, in Egyptian papyri from the same era, in Phoenician maritime logs. 40 meters, that's 12 stories tall, longer than a modern ocean liner, longer than a blue whale. Keep that number in mind. Because it appears again in the most documented encounter in history. And that's when everything changes. What I'm about to show you changes everything about what you just learned. Because in 540 BCE, exactly 8 years after the military encounters stopped being recorded, a hero named Bellerophon supposedly captured Pegasus. The myth says it happened in a dream. A goddess gave him a golden bridle. He rode the creature into battle against the Chimera. But the Corinthian military archives tell a different story entirely, a story that was deliberately hidden. The military dispatch from 540 BCE describes an organized military operation, 50 soldiers, a specific location, the spring of Pyrene near the temple of Aphrodite, and a witness account so detailed that historians have always assumed it was added later by poets. It wasn't. It was written by Philenos himself, the same general who had been hunting Pegasus for 34 years. His account is the first time in history someone claims to have successfully restrained the creature. 50 armed soldiers, 1 creature, and victory. The dispatch describes the creature being lured to the spring with a live mare, a breeding animal. The creature appeared at dawn. 50 armed soldiers surrounded it in a coordinated ambush. And here's what makes this credible. Philenos describes the creature's behavior in precise military language, not divine or magical, behavioral. The creature was startled. It took flight. Multiple soldiers fired arrows. 3 arrows struck it, locations documented precisely. Left wing, right flank, tail feathers. The creature fled. They pursued for 6 kilometers. They chased the creature for 6 kilometers. Across the plain, toward the mountains. And then Philenos writes something that the poets later turned into "the goddess gave him a golden bridle." What actually happened was tactical genius. The creature was exhausted, wounded, it landed, and Philenos, a military commander, not a mythological hero, approached it with a rope and leather restraint. The creature allowed it, no divine intervention, no impossible magic, a wounded animal. Restrained by an experienced hunter, the same creature that had killed 17 soldiers in 34 years. Once restrained, Pegasus was transported to Corinth. The military records describe the logistics in bureaucratic detail. A reinforced wooden cage, 40 meters long, remember that measurement? The cage had to match the creature's wingspan exactly. Food requirements documented, behavior notes recorded daily, temperature observations, water consumption. For 7 months, every detail was noted. Pegasus was kept alive, studied, observed. Then the records simply stop. No explanation. No final entry, just silence. The next reference to Pegasus appears 300 years later. After 540 BCE, the exact moment Pegasus was captured, the creature disappears from every single documented source. No more Hittite texts, no more Egyptian papyri, no more Phoenician logs, no more Corinthian military records. For 800 years, complete silence. Then, around 300 BCE, Aristotle begins his systematic cataloging of all living creatures. He mentions Pegasus exactly once, in a single sentence. He calls it a creature of unreliable account, likely extinct for generations. That's when the mythology truly begins. That's when the poets rewrote everything. That's when Pegasus becomes a symbol instead of a threat. The mythology of Pegasus was invented to explain something civilization could no longer discuss. A real creature, documented across 4 centuries by 4 separate civilizations, captured and contained by military forces, then erased from the historical record. The poets took the facts and wrapped them in divine meaning. Pegasus became a symbol of inspiration, freedom, heroism, everything the real creature was not. It was a weapon, a terror, a problem that one general solved, and then history forgot. But the evidence remained hidden in archives, waiting for someone to look. The question isn't whether Pegasus was real. The military records, the artifact evidence, the cross-cultural documentation across 4 civilizations prove it was. The question is what happened after 540 BCE? Where was the creature kept? Why did every civilization stop writing about it at exactly the same moment? And most importantly, why did Aristotle call it likely extinct 300 years later? Something happened in Corinth. Something that required absolute silence, something that forced the most powerful empire of the era to erase a creature from history entirely. Pegasus didn't become legend because it was divine. It became legend because civilization needed to forget. The evidence is buried in archives across Europe. The truth is scattered across ancient texts in 6 languages, and the creature that shaped the mythology of the Western world has been erased so completely that we call it a myth. But you know better now. You know it was real. The only question remaining is, what else did they erase? What other creatures are hiding in the margins of history? Drop your theory in the comments below, and subscribe to Dark Creature. We find the creature's history tried to bury.